Hello and welcome to Jive Talk. I'm very excited to have a guest on today, Dr. Borja Villa-Jonga, who is a PhD, and he has studied at, he was previously at Columbia University and New York University and the University of Newcastle, and he's devoted his research to the relationship between traditional religion and modernity. And he runs a channel which I enjoy called The Modern Platonist. I've been on there a couple of times. He's also been on Jive Talks a couple of times before. He and I will both be speaking next month at the Pagan Futures conference in London, which will also have live music from Wilkinsman, who does the Survive the Jive theme tune. And that conference is a really important event because it's dealing with one of the most pressing topics for all kinds of religions at the moment in the world, but especially, I think, for us as pagans, transhumanism. Transhumanism is this philosophy, if you can call it, it's a bit of a shaky philosophy, it's a bit of a flimsy philosophy, but it's immensely popular with very powerful people, and it's being promoted by very influential organizations, which makes it pertinent a topic for discussion, especially because the way it is integrated into power structures at the moment presumes that it is possible for various religions to sort of fall in line under the what the UN would call like the common values of global humanity. But if this these kind of organizations who are claiming there are these common values for a so-called common humanity, it's very important that we understand why are they then how can they also be aligned with transhumanism, which is being promoted by the UN and UN affiliated organizations. It has been since the 50s. So actually, as you shall see today, we're going to sort of introduce some of the topics that will be discussed at the conference in London. And I hope to see as many of you there as possible because it's going to be a great event. And I think we're going to make some really some great headway in defining what our position as pagans needs to be going forward, in a world where transhumanist power is a reality we have to face. So today, let's introduce some of these topics and try and sort of pave the way for the conference and give everyone a flavor of what's to come. Now, what is transhumanism? Some of you might ask. Well, it's. Would you like to start off a brief introduction, Borja?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Tom. It's a pleasure to be here with you. It's been a long time since I was in a Jive talk, and I'm very happy to be here already dealing with some of the topics for the Pagan Futures conference for June in London. Transhumanism is a very it sounds like a very creepy thing, a very edgy thing, but actually it's one of the main tenets that's been fueling not only these international organizations, some since inception like UNESCO, but also Silicon Valley. And when we say Silicon Valley, we are mentioning Facebook, Amazon, Tesla, Twitter in the old Dorsey iteration, and maybe the new Musk iteration, because Musk is a great proponent of that. So we are really dealing with the ideology and a human project that it's the project of the most powerful people on Earth. So it's very important to dissect it and to understand what does it mean and what it entails for us today. So, of course, we are dealing with a project that has insane amount of funding. It's very well funded. It's well promoted, even on the most edgy things like cryonics, getting your body frozen, to common parlance. These things are really something that is in the conversation and in the practices of this group of people. Actually, I run a lot of articles on Silicon Valley in Barcelona years ago, dissecting every single aspect of their practice and philosophy. But here for transhumanism, we need to talk about Julian Huxley, which is the brother of the writer Aldous Huxley. He was a eugenist. He was very involved in the eugenics. Past the 30s, past the 40s, he was also a biologist, a geneticist, and was the first president of UNESCO. And he obviously he was a rabid atheist, and he believed not only in what was the old humanism. And a caveat here, when I'm saying humanism, I'm not talking about a Renaissance ideology. I'm talking or a movement of writers and artists. I'm talking about humanism as an atheist ideology opposed to religion and anything traditional. So Huxley was really into developing organizations, developing ideas for humanism, till the point he decided to propose transhumanism as the next human frontier. So basically, to transcend man, not in a Nietzschean way, which it's quite different. I want to make this distinction, but in a way that inserted in the debates of the 60s, we need to use technology in order to unleash the power of man and to transcend man, bridging both together. And you can have echoes here of Marcuse in the 60s as well, Eric Fromm. I'm talking about all the most subversive, psychoanalytic Marxist crap from the counterculture. So this is a very important trend at that time that really created the foundations of that. But Huxley was the most radical of all, and his legacy didn't end with him. It continued, and it's been continuing in a myriad of organizations, of ideas that today are fueling what in the New School, which is a very, very, very subversive university in New York, calls future studies. And the kind of the baton was taken by...
Yeah. Could you repeat that, please?
Sorry, say it again.
What was the school called? Because I think you broke up.
The New School for Social Research is a very, very Marxist school that became a university in New York. It was created by emigres in the 30s, and it's basically one of the most radical universities in America still today. There they had these Julian Huxley he was teaching there at some point, and then they had this Iranian guy that became known as FM 2030 as legal name, because he believed that we had to flee anything ethnic, quote unquote, tribal or ancient, and adopt post human identities. And he was the guy that was responsible for future studies at the New School for a while, and his legacy has had a very important impact on what is transhumanism today, and that was merged with the Californian ideology. Californian ideology, to give some context, is the ideology that fueled the internet boom in the late 90s, 95, 96. It was very well represented by Wired magazine. And the California ideology found, these hippies, libertarian substratum in America, and immediately got interested in transhumanism, although it was not a foundational tenet of transhumanism. So we faced the dot-com boom in the 2000s with transhumanism entering Silicon Valley and becoming slowly but steady the main ideology. And here we need to talk about the philosopher of Silicon Valley, Harari, that very nice Israeli guy.
Before we get to Harari,
I'd
like to just clarify some things. So the Silicon Valley has always had in the 90s, early 90s and stuff as well, like the early tech kind of belief in a kind of that technology will be able to solve a lot of our problems is not in itself transhumanism, and also it's not bad. And I just want to clarify for some people who don't understand, transhumanism doesn't mean people who love technology, and paganism does not mean we oppose technological development or solving problems with novel technological innovation. That isn't the problem at all. Of course, we can see in pagan history the integration of novel technologies into the religion itself. Someone in the chat said, I don't agree with them, but the first rider in a cart was probably transhuman. The feminist author Donna Haraway, who I read at university, with her Cyborg Manifesto, makes the argument we're already cyborg, we're already transhuman because of the way we depend on technologies. And people say if you've got a pacemaker, you're a cyborg, something along those lines. This kind of argument. Now,
it's a straw man argument.
It isn't a terrible argument, but there is a point that we're integrated with technology. We always have been. As soon as we have technologies, like the way our bodies exist now is the result of technology acting. And I don't just mean like that we've changed since the Industrial Revolution. I mean like Stone Age man is evolving in integration with his use of fire, with his use of whatever technologies he has available to him. Like the technologies in preparing meat have changed the shape of the jaw and therefore the skull, and allowed for changing developments of the brain. There has always been a kind of coalescent, in tandem development of human technologies and the human organism. And in that sense, you can use that argument for saying we've been cyborgs or transhumanists since the beginning. However, that obscures the fact that what is also being presented as a very novel and new philosophy, which is transhumanism, is something very different from anything that's ever occurred before, which would certainly redefine the human organism. And it did, as you say, grow out in Silicon Valley in this environment where a kind of utopian belief in the power of technology to solve all the world's problems already existed, and had some positive developments. Like early ideas about the internet, I think, were quite positive, and that like freedom and open, which have all sort of fallen apart now. But the with the monopolies of these massive transnational organizations like Google. But there was a separate, as you say, development with the UN, and now we have at the same time organizations like the World Health, the World Economic Forum, which is affiliated with the United Nations, the United Nations itself, and the United Nations promoted author Yuval Harari, who is also a favorite, as you say, of the Silicon Valley people. But the Silicon Valley organizations like Google, Facebook, etc., have come to the same philosophical conclusions as these as organizations like the UN, which was in the 50s in parallel. But now the powers, they hold huge amounts of power, where people are even suggesting like organizations like Google and Facebook ought to have a seat at the UN. Well, the UN has, and we know, been promoting transhumanism from the beginning. Julian Huxley was involved with the UN, and he was the first director of UNESCO. And then even the Assistant Secretary General of the UN, Robert Mueller, said, and he's called the philosopher of the United Nations, he said that, this needs to be like a new religion of the world, where all the people sort of merge into a universal cosmic civilization. And he talks about technology as being part of that. So it is, and the original use of the word transhumanism by Julian Huxley, which is somewhat different to how self-professed transhumanists describe what transhumanism is now, but he was talking about it in terms of the salvation of technology. Whereas modern people, and you'll see a lot of very controlled Google results if you search for what transhumanism is now. Bear in mind that very, very powerful forces are trying to make sure that there's only positive descriptions of it now. They will describe it in terms of like, overcoming the limitations of humanity. It's very crude philosophical description of what exactly the limitations of humanity are, because they don't assert the existence of any Platonic solid laws of the universe, yet they also say that there are solid limitations, because limitations, of course, implies that there is a goal to which one is limited in his ability to achieve, and that goal is somehow objective, like as an objective goal of humanity. It implies a purpose. You can't say that someone is limited unless you have like what are they limited in? But anyway, now we can see that what we're living in is a power structure where not only like Silicon Valley and the global organizations like the UN, but also individual very rich people like Peter Thiel and Elon Musk, who are self-professed transhumanists, are promoting it. So we're living. It's certainly not just a fringe and irrelevant idea. And these people have a lot of power over your life, whether through tech or through influencing government actions like the UN and the EU do. So it's important that we discuss this. Now, what were you going to say about Harari?
Yeah, that's I love the way you put it all together. Harari is a very interesting character. It has a peculiar upbringing, peculiar career, and he begins writing these books about the history of humanity. But he's not interested in the history of humanity. He's not interested in understanding man in history. He's understanding in projecting his ideology and what he thinks needs to be the future of man into history. So it's kidnapping technique, techne in Greek, which is inherent to man. So making utensils to better open carcasses of animals, to better process food, to better hunt. This is inherent. We are technical animals, and we are going to always be. But the integration of technology, of technique, that changed drastically in post-war, in the order of post-war Europe and post-war world, in the post-1945 order, this is a complete shift of what technique means. That's why I mentioned Marcuse and Fromm, because they were obsessed in discussing these things. And Harari is a great disciple of these people. But Harari, and there are many articles talking about how he ended up being at Silicon Valley and being one of the vedettes in Silicon Valley and being loved by the people at Silicon Valley, being invited, being paid from these people to project this idea. So when people read his books, they think, oh, this is a scholar just writing about history of man. Oh, that's very cool. No, it's not. It's projecting his third book, which is the main book, the real deal, into the other two books and making people believe that our history, it's faithfully going to that future that his clique imagined for humanity. That's the trick. And we need to really uncover this thing.
I should say when I was working at WHO and when I was visiting UN, people always talking about Harari and always recommending when they found out that I was interested in anthropology, they'd say, "Oh, you must have read *Sapiens*, right?" And it's interesting because he's quite similar background to me. He studied medieval European history, and then he went into his own interest branched backwards into prehistoric Europe and prehistoric mankind and anthropology in general and DNA. Those are all things. That's exactly what happened to me. I was like, actually, I start pushing further back, and then the further back you go, the more useful DNA becomes to explain things. But archaeogenetics is this emerging field that's so fascinating. But his whole trajectory of study is extremely ideological, and it defines, even in the title *Sapiens*, it's defining a kind of an idea of humanity, which is what the UN promotes and has promoted since the beginning. And the problem I have with this perception is that it's fine if you want to have it, but that comes from a religious perspective. It comes out of specifically a specific religion in a specific part of the world at a specific time. That's Protestant Europe. It comes out of the revolutionary ideas of the 17th and 18th century, mainly in Western Europe, and and that is where liberalism comes from. And this one author who's written about this quite popularly recently is the historian and author Tom Holland, who wrote a book called Dominion, where he's trying to explain to modern liberals that all their values come from Christianity, that Christianity is the root of the modern West and everything it believes. It doesn't matter that most, like, increasingly amount of the people of the West aren't Christians. The actual structure of the West is built on Christianity, even though that's not saying that it is Christian, and it's not saying it's the same as Christianity, but it came out of, it's like a mutation of Christianity. And some of the aspects built into the UN's agenda and also into transhumanism have a religious dimension. One of the things I object to most about transhumanism as it's, and the modern philosophy as it actually is, and not what, this like, oh, have we always been transhumanist? Have we always been like robots, whatever? I'm not really interested in that discussion. But the desire to conquer death, the desire to not die and to say that death is a bad thing that must be overcome, the idea that we can perfect nature, like nature is somehow flawed. And so that's two. And then three is the idea that we ought to unite into a single consciousness. That has these all have religious features and have existed in other religions before transhumanism. So, the idea conquer death is obviously familiar to Christians because Christ was said to have come to conquer death. Most religions, pagan religions especially, as we should get to later, I think, we don't believe in conquering death. We consider death desirable and good. We want death. There's a Hindu prayer that says, "Hail death." Death is a good thing. And nature as well, we'll talk about, we don't consider it to be an incomplete work that it's our job to complete. And the idea of uniting into a single consciousness within that, the transhumanist agenda, it doesn't have a truly transcendent element. It's just about the idea of like the human evolution was only biological to a certain degree, and their belief is the next step in human evolution is actually to depart away from the human biological organism and into the created future of what was some non-biological thing. Some AI will eventually surpass human intelligence, and that event will be called the technological singularity, and it will be so intelligent we won't even be able to understand it. And at that point, the future of human evolution will continue through that entity. And they sometimes think of things like, we'll all upload our consciousness into the internet or whatever, and then it will become one with this supreme AI, which will be like a computer god. They want us all to be joined in one with the computer god. There's obviously a religious dimension to that, and their anticipation of it is messianical, because the post-human ideal, like what we have to evolve towards, this inevitability of history, that we move towards something, which also is very similar. It's very much like in Christianity, where you have a linear idea of history, where the birth of Christ, and you have the apocalypse and the second coming to wait. There's like everything, it's a timeline that has all been foretold, whereas many pagan religions and Hinduism believe in the cycles, everything again and again. So the main religion I think is worth bringing up here is Gnosticism, which is an early sort of Christian belief sect, which there's many different definitions of Gnosticism, and scholars will argue on it. But within the limited time frame of this stream, let's just talk about the early Christian sect, which became regarded as heretical, and most Christians regard it as heretical. But their essential belief is that the natural world is evil, and that we instead will seek unification with God in the next world. And that's what transhumanists believe, except that without having God. They don't believe in an immaterial. So they replace it with the man-made material heaven of pure data. And I find it very interesting. There's a woman called Mary Harrington. She's also a feminist author. But unlike Donna Haraway, she's much more critical of this sort of thing. And she said, she calls it fully automated luxury Gnosticism, in reference to the idea of fully automated luxury communism, and to describe the goals of these really very online technophiles who kind of hate the natural world and consider that online identities their real. That's the real world where they live in forums and whatever. So they're already some coming into being. Do you have any comments on the religious dimension of this transhumanist phenomenon?
Yeah, actually, you pointed out very beautifully a lot of the sources, and yeah, I mean, Tom Holland is very right. Christianity permeates everything, even what is non-Christian today or post-Christian, to echo other authors, because they are taking, the linearity of time, the progression of history. These are all Christian ideas, and the technological horror that is being developed in transhumanism. Uh, Moving away from technique as a human characteristic from us, it's fully Christian as well. It's just like there is this disdain of the world. You need to transcend the world, um, and these transcendence of the world, because there is no immanence in Christianity, and paganism has a good balance of immanence and transcendence as a traditional religion. So when Christianity wants to fully transcend the world, this idea mixed with the social message of the gospel, or the social message passed through Hegel and Marx prism, it becomes what is transhumanism today, because transhumanism is on this weird left that is in the post-war order, in UNESCO, UN, but also in some of the core tenets of Silicon Valley and California ideology passed through libertarianism. But the important thing here is that Gnosticism, as you were mentioning, Gnostics have this disdain of the world. They wanna transcend the world, but they are insanely radical in the message and the practice. They really can be echoed as well as the martyrs. The martyrs in Christianity, there was a sect in Christianity that people were killing themselves. They were committing suicide because they said we need to kill themselves in order to send to heaven, because we are saints already, and the more we stay here in the world with sensible world matter, we are becoming more soiled by sin. So we need to kill ourselves and go to heaven. Gnostics are not as radical, although some were, and they have these methods of enlightening to acquire, as similar to Buddhism, they acquire nirvana, or to make a very rude equation here, and they simply are willing to leave the body. And here we have the body, flesh is bad. We have these complete Manichaean, complete dual perspective, the evil body and the sinless pure mind, which is going to be taken again by Descartes in the 17th century. And he's going to really put a line in the metaphysical meditation saying, oh, actually we need to transcend the body and be pure mind. And here we have the biggest divorce and the very beginning of separating in modernity mind and body. And Gnostics were doing that, and I wouldn't claim per se that this is a Christian phenomenon, but it found fertile ground in Christianity, because Christianity had this rejection of the body, the flesh, in the Paul epistles, and of the world. So that's why Christianity decided to expunge them, because they were too radical. They were drifting away from even the Greco-Roman reality. Greco-Roman reality was not as disdainful of the body, and Christians at the end of the day were a Greco-Roman phenomenon, and they had to, after Constantine, to harmonize with them. So someone mentioned, I think one of the messages you pull here, Nag Hammadi library was discovered in 45. This is the Gnostic text. We've been obsessed for decades about them. We knew them through the polemics in the first centuries of the church that were quoted at length. But now we have the text, and they have impacted even more. So we have the source of all these, and it's becoming I wouldn't
The,
say it's direct.
the comment specifically said Julian Huxley was the one who translated them. The UN, so the UN are translating the Nag Hammadi text for about Gnosticism, which is not an insignificant fact given the context. It's
not insignificant at all. So when we see that the Gnosticism is becoming a thing to the point that we have the Da Vinci Code movie. And I think this movie expresses so many things of our first decades of the 21st century. It's fueled, the movie's fueled by Gnosticism mixed with other stuff, but especially with that. We see that we are pushing this religious message to a point that we need to understand religious aspect in this duality. We need to bring it to a contemporary discourse, and it's this renewal of a discourse and this hatred of the body and uploading ourselves. And I'm saying uploading on purpose because it's new TV series called Upload that it's basically that. So we are already echoing
sometimes the transhumanists who want to change the body, like upgrade the body with, to become a cyborg, or in the more literally completely lose the body altogether and become pure consciousness. Well, not really pure consciousness, not even any consciousness at all. Become pure data in a machine, which is to me horrific, but to them somehow interesting. I wanted to so someone Mythical Iberia, before we move on to like the official pagan opposition to these concepts, Mythical Iberia asked you specifically if you could explain the connection or influence of Cosmism in transhumanism. I'm afraid I don't really know about that.
Yeah, I know little, but there is and that actually intersects very well with Elon Musk. There is this idea that the man is called to dominate the universe. It's a very radical idea that our next frontier is both digital to get rid of our body, our carcass, and we need to do this in order to colonize the universe.
This also has some biblical parallel, doesn't it? With
it does.
Go forth and multiply, and the idea that the earth and the bounty thereof is yours. It says all that in the Bible, kind of like you're given a remit to sort of do what you want with the natural resources available to you.
And in the end, if you ditch the body and you upload yourself, become data, not pure conscious, but data, you have a much easier task because you have all these fully automated machine horror at your service, and you are this brain in a box, to put it in a blunt image, that controlling all this techno horror and colonizing Mars and wherever you want to colonize.
So someone else in the comments, and this is what we were planning to talk about next anyway, was a bit confused about whether Gnosticism influenced Platonism or the other way around. And I think that's I can understand why someone will get that confused, because there are some generally Platonists reject Gnosticism, and some of them outright reject Gnosticism, but some of them, like Plotinus, it's a bit more complicated, where he rejects Gnosticism but is also influenced by Gnosticism. And of course, to say whether Gnosticism was influenced by Platonism, well, Platonism is hundreds of years older, and it was like one of the dominant thought schools of the classical world. So I think all Christianity, Gnostic or otherwise, is influenced by Platonism to some extent. But what would you say on that subject, Borja?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, because Plotinus is a great enemy of Gnostics, and he really disdained Christians and Gnostics. But there is this, he's drifting away from the master. He's drifting away from the classics that at that time had become a classic. Plato works, classic, and the Enneads, he's beginning to create his own system that is going to open the Neoplatonic school. And he claims that we are not entirely undescended. What does this mean? That our soul has a tiny connection with the divine, with the one, with the divine intellect, and all this triad of divine entities. It's very hard. I'm saying divine entities, and it's not precise.
The language is to be so particular, doesn't it?
Yeah, Plotinus is crazy to read. It's so precise and it's so complex. But basically, man has a connection with the divine. He has this tiny connection with the nous, which is the superior part of the soul, and the superior part of the soul is truly connected with the divine. Thus, we are not fully understand it, and we need to use this bit of connection to ascend ourselves through contemplation. So basically, through having a practice or a perspective that it doesn't interact with anything that is sensible, which is matter, which is body. So it is not Gnostic, but definitely with that, Porphyry, his disciple, is going to be rejecting ritual, rejecting the cosmic order, rejecting the divinity of nature, rejecting that matter actually contains part of the divine through the world soul. It's going to really radicalize the fact that everything that is matter infected, matter related, it's evil, or it's prone to be evil.
It's very, very. It gets too close to Gnosticism at that stage, where because of the Platonic, the Platonic school becoming hostile to matter and considering that matter is the source of evil, it suddenly turns Platonism into something that is actually antithetical to normal pagan practice in the Roman Empire. Completely. Until someone by the name of Iamblichus comes along and tries to fix this problem. Would you like to explain that?
This is a crazy thing, because we have Plotinus drifting away from Plato, and then we have Iamblichus going back to Plato, but not only using Plato, but using two new sources, the Chaldean oracles of the Julian the Theurgist, and of course theurgy itself, which is a very intricate ritual that actually can bring the divine to matter. I'm simplifying a lot. So if there is
he alleges that it comes from Egypt, doesn't he? Iamblichus himself alleges it comes from Egypt, although I think some scholars just don't think that that's true.
We know that he's Middle Eastern. It could be Syrian, like the Chaldean oracles themselves. It could be Egyptian. Definitely, it comes from the eastern part of the empire. But
the name is Greek.
The name is Greek.
The name is Greek, which is interesting. And he was speaking Greek and worshiping Greek gods alongside others, of course.
Absolutely.
So Iamblichus makes it possible basically creates a philosophical justification for right, which is the basis of all pagan religion, including the religion of the Eastern Roman Empire, and not just Indo-European religions, but pretty much all religions that ever existed are based on right. And I've seen some scholars of religion say that right comes first, and then theology comes later to just justify it as a quote unquote. I think that's a bit cynical, but I think they develop in tandem actually. But right is fundamental, and if you reach a philosophical cul-de-sac where you're actually trying to invalidate right, then you've gone the wrong way. When it comes to Iamblichus, and he's saying that the world is divine, right? So the idea, correct me if I'm wrong, it's not that the divine exists within matter, but that matter exists within the divine. So everything contains the divine. The gods made the world. Also, Platonic non-Gnostic view. The gods made the world. The gods are good. Therefore, the world is good. It's a simple equation.
It's simplistically, it's like this. Yeah.
And he's also trying to promote the idea of ritual as something that occurs within time and space. It properly defines man's space and man's place within the cosmos, which is divine, the divine cosmos. Yeah. And so we mimic the actions of the divine within the divine. To become, to honor it, and that it's a really that's the proper way to do it, and that he's not saying that like there's one universal way that it needs to be done. And he and other Platonists are happy to justify regional variations of religion, which naturally occur in the pagan world, like, you know, the Celts, the Druids, the Egyptians. I mean, some Platonists talk about like the wisdom of you know, the Egyptians or the Chaldeans or the Druids as examples of noble barbarians who had achieved wisdom even outside of the, you know, the schools of Plato, etc. So, do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, absolutely. There is a very important point here. It's that for Iamblichus, the soul is fully descended. There is a tripartite division of the soul, like the nous, timos, and the epithemia, but it's fully descended. So yeah, the nous has the faculty of reaching the divine, but it needs tools, because there is many ways to access the divine, not just like with Plotinus, with this permanent connection, because there is a part of us, of the divine, because we are undescended. So this is a very important distinction, because it changes a lot. It's what makes Iamblichus radically different from Plotinus in this sense, and it recovers a more, have to say, pure idea of Platonic theology. So yeah, that's the first thing. The second thing is that the degree of tolerance in the Greco-Roman world, in ancient world, of different ethnic religions was paramount. A deity was not rejected as false; it was rejected as being foreign or inimical. So, for example, when Romans were attacking, you know, the gods of foreign nations, it was not because they were false; it was because they were foreign, and they respected them, and they wanted to just, you know, defeat in battle. But they were not being disrespectful to them, or like Christians would be destroying everything. And many times we see these syncretic efforts of Romans. You know, we keep the gods of the conquered peoples, but we adapt it with the Roman gods. And it's in Britain we have examples. In Germania we have examples. So and definitely in Gallia we have examples. That's a very important thing, because it's radically different from the practice we're going to inherit from Christianity, Islam, or Judaism, where there is this enmity because the other gods are false, and that changed the way we see foreign gods or other gods. But Iamblichus is not part of that, even though he knew Christians and he was in a time that Christians were becoming powerful, but he was not doing this. He was keeping actually the all pagan lore, all pagan practices to the letter. And he represented the renewal. And that's why when Julian, the Emperor Julian, tried to revive some type of paganism, he looked at Iamblichus. And that's an important note here.
Yeah. So now we know we've got a basic idea who the Iamblichus is now. So let's think about what how his philosophy and that of other Platonists and pagans in general show that paganism is not really compatible with transhumanism. And I hope you understand, viewers, that we haven't chosen Iamblichus arbitrarily, but because he is the Platonic philosopher who justifies traditional forms of right, he is one that even if you're not a Platonist, you're just a pagan. If you're a pagan, it means you participate in the rites to your gods, right? That means that's what a pagan is. You believe in gods and you participate in the rites. But the only pagan philosopher we have who actually tries to justify the rites is him, except, you know, Plato, upon who he's built. But let's we've already outlined some of the tenets of transhumanists and the people who are promoting transhumanism, and one of these is this idea of a global religion that will unite all humanity, and that might sound desirable to some people depending on your political beliefs, but is it compatible with paganism? Well, Iamblichus himself, being a a Middle Easterner, had integrated his beliefs somewhat with his Greek pagan beliefs with those of other pagans like Egypt, the Chaldeans, probably quite local to him, but also Middle Eastern concepts like angels. He managed to integrate that with the concept of gods. So this quote explains his belief on the world of like how different cultures experience them, the gods. If these forms of worship were only human customs and received their authority from our cultural habits, one might argue that the cults of the gods were inventions created by our thinking. But in fact, the one invoked in sacrifices is a god, and he presides over these sacrifices, and a great number of gods and angels surround him. And every race on earth is allotted a common guardian by this god, and every temple is also allotted a particular guardian. So by this god, he's talking like, this is like Plato's one, and his angels, when he says angels, he's kind of similar to what a Greek would call a daimon. But these guardians are like regional. Is that you'd agree with that?
Yeah, angels are messengers. It's a late development of Greek-Roman paganism, and it's kind of a daimon. Yeah, and the Platon is used extensively, and that.
Yeah, even Philo, the Jew, actually admits that angels are essentially the equivalent to daimons, but most Jews would not admit that. But anyway, so here you can see that, and then also another. I believe is a Platonist, although I think this is somewhat contested, Celsus, in his polemic against Christianity, he mentions the Jews, and I don't think he's a fan of the Jews, but he praises them in one respect, as you shall see. The Jews, like other separate nationalities, have established laws according to their national genius and preserve a form of worship which has at least the merit of being ancestral and national. For each nation has its own institutions, whatever they may chance to be. This seems an expedient arrangement, not only because different minds think differently and because it is our duty to preserve what has been established in the interests of the state, but also because in all probability the parts of the earth were originally allotted to different overseers and are now administered accordingly. To do what is pleasing to these overseers is to do what is right. To abolish the institutions that have existed in each place from the first is impiety. And these overseers, Celsus describes as the same thing as what Iamblichus is calling a guardian. This is regional, the idea that every region has its own way of engaging with the divine. And that, to me, is direct. That makes a big problem with the idea of uniting into this global religion that we talked about earlier, like the integration. The exact quotation from Assistant Secretary General of the UN, Robert Mueller, is the world's religions must globalize themselves so they can give birth to the first global cosmic universal civilization. Now, I don't know if that's possible to do that without directly going against what Iamblichus and Celsus have talked about as being the regional guardians, the regional overseers, which are our gods, the gods of our ancestors in our respective locales. Your own opinion, Borja?
Yeah, no, these are great quotes, actually. And it tells a lot on how the cosmic order, cosmos, this is a Greek concept close to Dharma. This cosmic order, it's material and it's spiritual. You cannot separate both. We have drifted away so much from tradition, from the world of tradition, that we think that spirituality is a made-up thing. It's just, something ethereal that doesn't really exist. Then we come psychoanalysis. It's an invention of the mind. It lives in the mind. So who cares? It's fantasy. But actually, in a world of tradition, the harmony between the material and the spiritual is absolute. So a forest, a temple, a cave, a well, a lake. It's material, but it has a spirit. It has a spiritual dimension, and we cannot subtract that. We can. It's impossible. It's impossible. We can destroy the lake, but the spirit is going to not disappear per se. That's why if you change the course of a river will come back there because there is something else. Okay, so I don't want to have a digression here.
But that was a really good point you made about like the physical characteristics in the landscape, because it's geography as well. Like it's not just ethnicity as in terms of blood and
exactly.
descent. It's like it's geography. When the people in a region have, you know, the Eskimos' religion will be very specifically related to, you know, they're so focused on the spirit of the sea because pretty much everything they eat is coming out of the water. And so they're taking souls from the spirit of the sea. So that their entire orientation towards the divine is looking down into the water. That's a natural thing for them. That might not make any sense at all to someone who comes from a culture in an inland desert. It wouldn't work. So like many people mistake when they talk about ancient pagans, they worship trees or they worship rocks. They did no such thing. A stone or a tree could be a potent symbol, like a liminal space which brought them closer to the divine, which exists within all matter, or rather, matter exists within it. But the way that we engage it is very much dependent on, we are in our monkey bodies. We experience the nature that we come from, where all the products, you know, we talked earlier at the beginning, like transhumanists believe that we and rightly so, our biology has been influenced by the technologies we've developed and used, but it's also been developed by the environment that we live in, and the different environments that different human populations come from have influenced us significantly. Tibetans have in just 5,000 years evolved to have specific blood type that will allow them to survive at higher altitudes. So we're constantly changing, we're constantly evolving, and epigenetics is proving that this can happen at a much quicker rate than earlier evolutionary science previously realized. And just as that has a biological implication, it also has a spiritual one. In order to approach the divine, we have to accept what we are in our material selves and engage with the material environment that produced us as physical beings as well, so we can see through what is matter, that is nature, the nature that we are a part of, to experience the divine. So we can't do that fully globally unless we preserve the regional differences and the explicit connection of people to geography, in my opinion.
That's beautifully said. We disregard geography, we disregard people, because we disregard the spirit of these entities. We simply see the physicality of the world. I'm thinking about the Stoic Theology. Yeah, there is such a thing of Stoic Theology. It was very big in antiquity. And they were discussing physics, what they consider discussing the physical world, understanding nature from a physical point of view. But on the other side, half of that was devoted to theology, because they understood that matter, the material, sensible world, was incomplete without the spirit. So the migrations of people settling specific places, people doing specific actions in time, in space, this is because there is something greater. There's something greater than the material world. This is the spiritual realms that is also in the world acting, because we cannot separate both. We need to end with this duality. We need to get this monistic approach of nature. Nature and the world soul are together, the matter and spirit. And this is what tradition has been teaching and has been living for millennia. And saying that today is like madness. It's like, we're defending something that it's crazy, it's obscure, arcane, whatever you want to say. Because the rabid materialism that's permeating everything made us impossible to think the spiritual things. And transhumanism is the next level. We have the void of materialism. Materialism has killed God, as Nietzsche put it. We killed the spirit, And now that we are devoid of the spiritual dimension, we have only materialism, and transhumanism is going to fill this void with this Gnostic, technophilic horror of uploading our consciousness, of transcending the body, of bringing this advancement, this post-human thing, just because we feel empty after killing God, after killing the spirit.
Yeah.
And that's why transhumanism is so pushed by the New World Order. That's why these powers, this Silicon Valley, are obsessed with that, because they are materialist people.
They think they're
hedonistic.
helping. They think they're helping because they can't they can't admit any fault on their own part. So they think that they've got this really solid philosophy, but it's actually extremely flimsy. And it doesn't, I can't find any basis for it. I look at their manifestos and stuff they put up. There's no actual base, like philosophical grounding for their assertions about the limitations of humanity that need to be overcome, or what the end, like, it's just technology good. It basically doesn't have much more to it than that. I personally, I think that from what I've understood of studying paganism and studying philosophy is that the body and the life in the body and death of the body are all essential parts of the process to becoming closer to the divine. That's how we have to approach the divine. So we're running out of time, but can we just quickly go over the problem of death as well? Because one of the best selling points for transhumanists' arguments is that medicine and medical developments and medical technology save lives and also make lives better. So, all kinds of horrible diseases can be, people can be alleviated with amazing technologies. And, for example, like, do we object to a guy who loses his limbs in the war being given cybernetic legs? I have no objection to that at all. And that they can say, this is why transhumanism is good, because it's a fault in it can fix faults. But the problem comes when it's like it goes to the ultimate thing, like it takes it to the nth degree. The body is flawed, not just because of injuries or sickness and disease, but the body is inherently flawed and needs to be improved by technology. That, I think, is wrong and goes against the idea that we are created by divine beings who don't make mistakes. And the other part is the idea of death is a mistake, or death is something for us to be overcome. I don't think that can be. There's many different pagan ideas about death. Some of them are very ancient. Some of them are like axial age innovations. But I'm pretty sure all of them consider death to be necessary. Do you have anything to say about that, Borja?
Yeah, no, I personally love this topic. I've talking about afterlife a lot, and I invite the viewers to come to the conference because we'll talk a lot about afterlife. That said, the idea of conquering death, that it's such a Christian idea. Jesus came here and conquered death because he resurrected the third day. This is an idea that post-Christianity takes and exploits. So it's not about improving medicine, which is it's something that Galenus was already doing. So it's we want to take care of our bodies because we want to take care of the spirit and the soul. So it's fine. But then we are going to be pushing the Christian idea that we need to be saved, that we need salvation, and salvation is not in a Christian afterlife, that still keeps the resurrection of the body. No, let's ditch the resurrection of the body. Let's just go to the afterlife, pure technophilic horror. We are going to try to upload our minds and have eternal, everlasting life this way. But this is the trick, because it's a bastardized idea from Christianity. And taking the technique and bringing it to a level of absurdity that becomes, yes, anti-human. But technique is human. It's fully human. It's inherent to us. There is no technique without man. And with that, we are taking Christianity to the next level. And I want to say Christianity appeared in a very specific time in history, where the biggest religious explosion in history between the 1st century BC, 1st century AD. It was religious anxiety. It was the explosion of the philosophical schools that were very, very competing between themselves, and the mystery cults. Christianity is just the merger of both philosophy and mystery cults. And it was successful at some degree. Well, to the point that it was became official religion. But exploiting this anxiety, it's exploiting a weakness. It's getting to the people and, are you sure that death is necessary? Are you sure that we need to consider reincarnation, metempsychosis? Put it the traditional name you want. Are you sure about that? And this anxiety fueled Christianity.
It exploits weakness. Are you afraid of death? Are you afraid of pain? Are you afraid of suffering in this life? These are things that transhumanism can says that it can fix, as if they're problems to be fixed. Whereas at least Christianity had an idea that suffering was desirable in some respect, whereas transhumanism is trying to move beyond suffering even. But yeah, I definitely see that the connection between the Christian thought and transhumanism. Some people in the comments are confused, saying we're saying that Christianity is pro-transhumanism. We're not saying Christians are pro-transhumanism. We're saying that transhumanism is the development out of the same thought world of Christian West. But before we finish, I'll just say some stuff about death, because I know that some people complain that I'm putting all pagans in the same, bucket or box or whatever. Well, yeah, some people believe that death is, for pagans, it's like you're going to reincarnate, or you got to die to reincarnate. Some, very few, but I mean, certainly the Orphic cult, rather like Buddhists, believe that the goal is to stop being reborn, to end the cycle of rebirth, samsara. Well, you still need to die for that. And for others, it's kind of for unification with the divine, kind of like Gnostics and Christians kind of have with their heaven, but that did exist that in pagan religions as well. Like Valhalla, you will join ancestors or great warriors or the gods, the Elysian fields or whatever. There are heaven kind of places where you still need to die for that too. So really, you can't, there's no way to justify opposing death, whichever pagan belief you have to believe in death as the end goal. You're fated to die. I believe that read many pagan religions. In my coming video on Indo-European ideas of hell and the underworld, it's very clear that be reborn as a descendant, you yourself can have the spirit of an ancestor, but you need to die first before you can be reborn. And I'd like to finish off with a few quotes from Nordic religious texts or things that pertain to Nordic religion. So Volsunga Saga, fear not death, for the hour of your doom, your fate, is set, and none may escape it. From the saga of the Jomsvikings, better to die with honor than to live in shame. Death there desirable. And of course, the famous words in the Holodomor, cattle die, kinsmen die, thyself too soon must die. But one thing never will die, fair fame of the one who has earned it. Cattle die and kinsmen die, thyself too must die. But one thing never shall die, the fate on each one dead. So it's clear here that there's this fatalistic view within paganism that you accept death, you do not fear death. That's what Caesar said about the Celts as well, that they were defined by their lack of fear of death because they knew they would be reborn. They had faith.
Yeah.
As a pagan, you have to accept death. You cannot be trying to escape death and try and justify it with some claim that it's Promethean and that you're challenging the gods, because even the gods accept death. It's not even the gods that have sentenced death necessarily upon you. It's a law, a fundamental law of all existence. And I should note as well, for the Indian perspective, that the Atharva Veda says praise to that Yama, who is the lord of the underworld, praise to death. And many people in India, just as like in Catholic countries, when people have near-death experiences, they say they saw either St. Peter or the Virgin Mary or something like that. Well, in India, they most commonly say when they near-death experience that they saw Yama, who is the lord of the underworld, the Hindu version of Hades or hell. So I think that it's quite clear that we need to be a pious pagan. You need to have a view of death, a mature view of death, where you accept it and you're not trying to escape it through technology or through becoming a computer.
That's beautifully put. And thank you so much for the quotes. It's great. I love that, opposed to death as punishment for the sinful behavior of the first man. Quite a contrast, and explains a lot of things. Sorry, I like a lot that we can convey this message intensely. We do not fear death. Death is part of life, and it's part of the cosmic order, and we cannot subvert this order. That's a very, very important thing that viewers need to understand.
Thank you for clarifying that. That was very well put, Borja. Well, there's so much to say about this. I really enjoyed this conversation. I think it went really well, and I'm really looking forward to the conference on the 25th of June in London. And because there's so much to go through, and we're going to have, each of us will have a talk. There'll be wonderful music by Dan Kapp of Wilkinsman, and afterwards there'll be this Q&A session where the audience, can all ask myself and Borja whatever questions you want about what we said. And then following that, there'll be a kind of post conference social where we just have drinks and have a chat informally, and you get a chance to network, meet other pagans, and have a chat with myself or Borja. So yeah, get onto Eventbrite and get your tickets before they sell out. It's going to be a fantastic event. It's really important, and we've got to really iron out some of the creases in this how we articulate the pagan position on death, on geography, on what it means to be within space, within time, and to honor your ancestors. And then hopefully we can say to the people in power who are claiming to represent global humanity that they need to represent us too if they want to make that claim. Mm-hmm. They have to make room for our position if they want to be able to claim to represent global humanity. Anyway, thank you everybody for watching. And I'll see you at the next Jive talk or at the Pagan Futures conference. Good night.
Thank you, Tom.